Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, Which Way Will Judicial Reform Go? My name is Emily Channel Justice. I am the director of the Temerte Contemporary Ukraine program, and I'm the co-sponsor of this event with the Atlantic Council. Why is judicial reform so important for Ukraine? I've said before that judicial reform is probably the most important reform that's facing Ukraine today, because all other reforms are tied to judicial reform. None of them will work without successful judicial reform. At the same time, we're seeing these reforms unfold right in front of our faces, so we don't really know which way that they're going to go, which is why having these four wonderful experts is so important for us to hear more about the potential developments for judicial reform and some of the things to watch out for in the coming weeks and months. We're joined today by His Excellency Mati Masikas, the Ambassador of the European Union to Ukraine, Halia Chuzik, the head of the Judicial Reform Department at the Anti-Corruption Action Center, Sergei Yanushets, the chairman of the Commission on Legal Reform and chairman of the Committee on Law Enforcement in the Verkhovna Rada, and Mikhailo Zhernakov, co-founder and chair of the board of the De Jure Foundation. Melinda Herring will moderate this discussion, and I'll turn it over to her now. Thanks so much, Melinda.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Emily. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and it's a pleasure to bring our community together to discuss this very important issue. So before we jump into it, I want to bring everyone up to speed if you haven't been paying attention to the minute details. Judicial reform is a big deal, like Emily said. In July, the Rada passed two judicial bills that were strong and that were praised by Ukrainian civil society in the West. One bill establishes the High Qualification Commission of Judges, and this is the body that fills judicial vacancies. And there's a lot of vacancies in Ukraine, so this body is really important. The second bill establishes an ethics committee within the High Council of Justice, and that has the power to discipline corrupt judges, also really important. The Ethics Committee has 6 members. 3 of them are internationals, and those 3 have been nominated. But the Council of Judges hasn't nominated its 3 judges, and that's a big problem. They had a September 13 deadline, and they did not make that deadline. Today, we're going to examine what's going on in Kyiv and what to expect. And this issue takes on even greater importance because President Zelenskyy, when he came to Washington last month, he said that judicial reform was one of his big achievements. So he's all in on this one. So we've gathered 4 great experts from Kyiv to discuss what to expect and to better understand how the situation is playing out. Ambassador, welcome to the Atlantic Council. It's great to have you here. You have been very vocal on this issue, and I want to applaud you for your advocacy. Diplomats like you have raised concerns about Ukraine's judicial reforms being slowed down, and it seems to be an intentional delay. 2 days ago or 3 days ago, the president of the Venice Commission urged all parties to take responsibility and appoint members to the ethics committee that I just described. Could you give us some perspective? How big of a deal is this reform to the EU, to the West, and to Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic ambitions? The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. It is indeed a very big deal. It's been called, the judicial reform has been called as the mother of all reforms. In Ukraine, indeed, many reformers in Central and Eastern Europe in 1990s, looking back, they are saying that back then it was all about privatize. But with a hindsight, the most important thing that should have been done would be the rule of law, and as part of that, judicial system, the court system. Justice reform for Ukraine is crucial on several aspects. It is about the trust of the Ukrainian state institutions, most notably by its citizens. Trust to the state and its institutions is a very big issue, or the lack of trust, or insufficient trust is a very big issue in Ukraine. The insufficient trust is about country's resilience and security. 74% of Ukrainians do not trust their judiciary. court system is the third least trusted institution, and thus this situation undermines Ukraine's state every day. Secondly, court system is hugely important for investment, both domestic and foreign. Justice system has become the main obstacle for business. According to the latest survey by the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, 56% of respondents cite court system as the biggest obstacle, followed by only 32% who cite the law enforcement agencies. So you can see why is this so important. The Ukrainian leadership has acknowledged that, and ambitious legislation, as you said, Melinda, was indeed adopted in July with international support having been analyzed and vetted by the Venice Commission, including on the participation of international experts, which does not interfere with Ukraine's sovereignty, since the last word will be with the Supreme Court. And now it's time for implementation. International partners have nominated their experts to both committees. Ukraine has done one part. The Ukrainian parties have done one part, nominated to one committee. Second is still pending, and it's fair to say that the glass is not half full without the second part, the ethics commission, also being established. These two processes must go and will go in parallel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those helpful framing remarks. Mihailo, before I jumped into Sergey, can you please explain, I said September 13th was that deadline where the body had to nominate 3 members from the Council of Judges to that ethics committee. They missed the deadline. What's happening now?
Thank you very much for having me here. Hello, very happy to be here. Yes, I wish I knew what was happening in terms of any justification or any reasoning that might be there, because there's none. What really happened is the Council of Judges is a judicial self-governance body elected 100% by the judges in Ukraine, was tasked with 2 very simple things. One, nominate 3 judges out of 5,000 that we have in Ukraine to the selection commission to select the new high qualification commissions of judges that selects judges, and nominate 3 other judges to the ethics council that is tasked with cleaning of the High Council of Justice, the most notorious and the most important, and at the same time the most notorious body in the Ukraine's judicial system. What they did is they did a perfectly good job with, well, not perfectly, they have the experts, the judges they nominated are not very good, but they did this with the selection commission, but they did nothing to do it for the ethics council, and they did not justify it in any way. So they merely sabotaged the whole process, and they ignored the law, the obligation that is put on them by the law. And they did not do anything for a month with the same exact, let me emphasize that, with the same exact thing they did for one body, they did not do, they failed to do for the other, even though they had judges who showed their willingness to be nominated and so on. So what we see is really the representatives of the judiciary that has to be reformed is sabotaging the reform as much as possible, despite all the problems that the Ukrainian judicial system poses, all the international obligations, all the promises that President Zelenskyy and his political power made to the people to cleanse the judiciary and fight corruption. They're sabotaging the whole process. That is essentially what is happening, and that absolutely has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihailo.
Sorry, just one more thing. I apologize. The president was very vocal about this, and which is good, that he said he will not let the reform be sabotaged. But at the same time, nothing else is happening. There's been at least two big meetings with the G7 ambassadors and all the stakeholders of the process, And there's been lots of statements by the top people in the world on that matter, including the president of the Venice Commission, but nothing seems to move several judges in the Council of Judges. It's just a very strange and weird situation where everything depends on a bunch of people who are not interested, and that has to be changed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mihailo. We'll have to dig in to those various bodies and who wants what in just a minute. Sergei Yanushis, you're sitting in the parliament. You're on the important committees that are watching these bills, and you are a lawyer yourself. Can you please explain what's the way out of this situation? So we're at an impasse. You guys passed great laws. It's time to implement them. The deadlines haven't been met. And the IMF is in town watching and collecting information. And there was a promise made to the IMF that this ethics body would be set up. So please explain to us how is Ukraine going to get out of this? Thank you for joining us.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation and the opportunity to express my views. You are right, it's very important for Ukraine. So that's why thank you for your questions, Melinda. And first of all, I would like to thank international and foreign organizations for promptly nomination joint list of candidates for the first composition of the Competition Commission to participate in the selection of candidates of High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine and the joint list of candidates for the first composition of the Ethics Council. Also, this list of candidates includes foreign judges and prosecutors who certainly have impeccable reputation and the necessary professional experience. Thank you once again. But unfortunately, so far, the Council of Judges of Ukraine has not been able to elect 3 of its representatives to the first composition of Ethics Council. If we talking about why, during the first voting, the candidates from the Council of Judges of Ukraine did not get the required numbers of votes to support. Explaining the situation, the judiciary emphasizes that central provision of the new law put members of the Ethics Council from international organization in a privileged position, even allow them to convene meeting and make decisions on their own, thus preventing the participation of other members of Ethics Council. That's why, according to the judiciary, I'm not agree with that. Professional judges and retired judges do not submit the candidates to the Council of Judges of Ukraine to participate in this selection, and the nominates do not receive the required number of voters. Personally, I think that some remarks from the judiciary may be right, as lower starting of High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine and the High Council of Judges have some differences in the function of the Competition Commission for the selection of the candidates for the High Qualification Commission of Judges composition of the Ethics Council. But the adoption of changes to improve the legislation in case should not precede the implementation of all authorities of judicial system of existing legislation. Of course, Member of Parliament and I personally will work to improve the legislation on the judicial system, but this should not be a condition and pressure from the judiciary. As for ways of overcome the situation, I would like to say that, as my colleague already said, 21 September, the Council of Judges of Ukraine announced the second selection of candidates for the first composition of the Ethics Council, which will last until October 21 this year. So I hope that at the end of October, we will be able to elect 3 candidates from the Council of Judges of Ukraine to first composition of the Ethics Council. However, if judicially self-government is not able to participate in selection procedure for a long time, I think it's my personal view, legislature will be forced to respond. On the other hand, some suggestions from the judiciary deserve attention. I have previously informed our international experts from Prava Justice and USAID experts about this proposal. Also, I think that at this stage, it's necessary to communicate with representatives of the judiciary to assure them of in availability of the Constitution of Ukraine, which guarantees the independence of the third branch of government in Ukraine. On the part of our international partners, I believe that it's necessary to strengthen cooperation and public appeals to judiciary on the need, and we need to continuation, of course, this reform. I would like to inform everybody the day before yesterday, Ukraine, as already said, we received the position of chairman of Venice Commission, Gianni Buchicchio, and it's very important for us. So, according to this information, it is the responsibility of all of implements the judicial reform. So, thank you, Melinda. I think that's all for these questions.
Thanks, Sergey. I didn't catch something you said. So, if the deadline is not met in October 21, what do you think happens?
You know, situation right now. As I received information yesterday from the head of self-government judge institution, Mr. Monish, he didn't receive any application. So we should wait for that. But at the same time, we have a lot of communication with Ms. Danishevska, head of Supreme Court of Ukraine, and another colleague from judicial system. They try to propose some proposition to make changes to the law. But my position, we should move forward, and changes to legislation couldn't be the reason we will not make changes to the law and waiting the three candidates from the judiciary. So we should move forward. It should be.
So Sergey, to summarize, your view is that those three candidates should be submitted, and
yes.
If changes to
anyway,
the law
I think three candidates should be submitted anyway. We can talk about any changes to legislation, but this is separate process.
Good, got it. I understand your view. Thank you so much. One other question, a follow-up question for you. So President Zelenskyy has made this a really big issue when he was in Washington, and you were in Washington too, and it was great to finally meet you. He said that this is my issue, and then he's also gone back to Kyiv and said, put the people on the ethics committee. Let's move this. What's he doing behind the scenes now to find a solution? How involved is he?
Okay, thank you for your questions. And I would like to responsibly inform you that I think President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, does not carry out any agreements behind the scene. All activities of the Office of President of Ukraine are transparent and open. However, today, Office of President of Ukraine, chaired by the head of the office and with participation of foreign ambassadors, G7, the Supreme Courts and Council of Judges of Ukraine, international experts, held 2 meetings on further reform on judicial system of Ukraine and launch of the High Qualification Commission Justice. I hope such close cooperation and dialogue will have positive results, and together we will be able to move this issue forward and launch the work of renewed authority of the judiciary. The Office of President of Ukraine has also decided to hold such work meeting with representatives of judiciary and international partners. I think I saw that maybe every week or maybe once per 2 weeks, which will ensure considering the selection process, as well as establish close cooperation, communication between representatives of judiciary and international experts, members of parliaments, all stakeholders. So now the judicial community has the opportunity to check this, if we want to build an independent and fair judicial in Ukraine, that meets socially demand for fair justice, we must take into account the experience and advice of our international partners. But I think we cannot make the reform without judicial system. I would like to emphasize once again that the law of restarting of work of High Qualification Commission of the Judges of Ukraine and High Council of Judges have been adopted and entered into force, and we must comply with them. Of course, the adoption of the law is not the result of judicial reform, but only the definition of rules and mechanisms for improving the system. And the results of this reform should be a renewal of the composition of High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine and the High Council of Judges, and the involvement of professional and honest person in the administration of the judiciary. Finally, I would like to know that judicial reform in Ukraine is an extremely necessary process for our society, which must be consolidated with all participants in this process and will be obligatory participation of international partners. So as a chairman of Legal Reform Commission, I'm always open to ready to support the legislation changes and will help improve the justice system. Thank you, Melinda, for your questions.
Thank you so much, Sergey. I appreciate your openness. I appreciate you being here and taking our questions. And it's great to see that you want to work with people and find a solution. So, Polly, and I know you need to leave at a certain point, so feel free to leave when you can. Thank you for joining us so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Melinda, once again.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you again soon. Polya, thank you for joining us. You are from the Anti-Corruption Action Center in Kyiv, and you've been following judicial reform for a long, long time. Can you summarize for us who or what is behind the delay? Is it the judicial mafia, for lack of a better term, or is it the presidential administration that's sabotaging this reform? The floor is yours, Polya.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you for your question, Melinda. As it's a very good question. Who is staying behind this sabotage of judicial reform, which is the most important reform for Ukraine? And for me, the answer to this question is obvious. It is judiciary itself. And by judiciary, of course, I do not mean all Ukrainian judges, because there are 5,000 of them. And of course, they do not make this decision jointly. But there are few judges who lead different group of interests within judiciary, few influential judges who lead these groups, which we refer to as clans. Unfortunately, it is our sad reality. Ukrainian judiciary has more in common with mafia rather than judiciary of European democracy. So judicial clans and their leaders are opposing the reform. Why? Because they are afraid of losing control over the High Council of Justice. Because what is High Council of Justice and what is Ethics Council? High Council of Justice is judges for judges, while Ethics Council is judges for the High Council of Justice, meaning they are judges for judges for judges. This is why this body is crucially important. And of course, judges realize then at the same moment the Ethics Council is established, they will lose control over the appointments to the High Council of Justice, meaning they will lose control over the whole judiciary, because they would not be able to influence disciplining judges, appointments of judges, and other stuff which is performed by the High Council of Justice. This is why the Council of Judges is sabotaging the establishment of the Ethics Council. And I've been following judicial reform for more than 5 years. And I was for 4 years, I was a member of the Public Integrity Council, the body that was tasked with integrity checks of judges. So I am sure when I'm saying that these are judicial clans who are sabotaging the judicial reform. And it's a very interesting question with regards to the presidential office. I clearly and sincerely do not think that president is the one who stands behind this sabotage. He's sincerely interested in the implementation of the reform. However, as of now, it is clear, it has to be clear to all the stakeholders in Ukraine that Council of Judges will not nominate members to the Ethics Council. It failed nominations 3 weeks ago within the deadlines established by law. And now they suggested these new provisions, how they will select judicial members to the Ethics Council. And 21st of October is not the deadline for the establishment of the Ethics Council. It is only the deadline for judges willing to be appointed to the Ethics Council. And we do not know how many time it will take for the Council of Judges to take the decisions. And as of now, the head of Council of Judges, Mr. Bogdan Monic, made everything he could to make it clear that their real intention is not to establish Ethics Council, but to sabotage the process for the reasons I've already mentioned. So now I think it is time for the president himself to take actions and because he's the only one who can unblock the reform. And unfortunately, I do not share the optimism of Mr. Ionushas because I do not trust Mr. Bogdan Monic. He lied a lot to the president during the meetings, to international partners, to ambassadors. He lies to civil society. One day, Mr. Monic says, we will appoint members of the Ethics Council. The next day, he's saying that they will appoint, but only after the parliament adopts the law. And by this, trying to blackmail the MPs and the president. So we clearly see that the real intention of the Council of Judges is to delay this issue. So now I think the president has to take action. And if he is not doing this, if the president is doing nothing, that he should be the one to blame for the delay of the reform in future. Because 3 weeks since September 13, to my mind, it is enough time to understand that Council of Judges will not unblock the reform, so actions have to be taken.
Thank you so much, Halia. Do you have a sense from looking at public opinion polling and talking to people, do people care about this? Are they likely to blame Zelenskyy? Are they likely to blame judicial bodies if this reform fails? Who's likely to be at fault in the mind of the public?
Well, as of now, it is judiciary, because we talk to people a lot through social media and other channels. And what we see is people do not trust judges and judiciary, but they still do trust the president. And at the end of the day, it will be president's responsibility. Mm-hmm. Failed judicial reform is something that it is one of the main reasons why former president of Ukraine was not re-elected. And I'm afraid the same will happen to Zelenskyy if he will do nothing with what is going on. And it is very easy. I do agree with Mr. Ionushas that legislative amendments have to be made, but not those legislative amendments mentioned by judiciary. The only legislative amendments that have to be adopted now by the parliament are the amendments that are removing Council of Judges from the process and replacing it with another subject who will be ready to nominate members to the Ethics Council. This is the only way to unblock the process right now. And the president is the only one who can initiate this process and ensure that the relevant draft law is adopted as soon as possible. If Wonderful. He will not do this, then he will be responsible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Halia. That's really helpful. Mihila, love to bring you in here. So the IMF is in Kyiv now, and it's looking at the current agreement, and it's trying to figure out if Ukraine has lived up to its promises. And judicial reform is one of the promises in it. Can you say a little bit more? What can the IMF and other IFIs, the international financial institutions, do to help unblock reform in Ukraine? Do they have much leverage, or does the presidential administration, the judicial bodies, not care?
Well, first of all, I'd like to agree with Halia on what really president's role is. Just very quickly on it, it's whoever is technically responsible for the nominations or whatever technical things there are. It is the country that bears the responsibility and the damage that follows. And it is the president who is responsible politically for the reform. And again, he will bear the consequences of the failure of the reform. So it is very important. We'd like to see more involvement of President Zelenskyy, both in terms of legislation and his personal involvement in these meetings and actually communicating to the judges that they have to play the role. Now, on the IMF was very instrumental when the anti-corruption court, when the high anti-corruption court was created in Ukraine, which is the only court to date, the reform of which was successful. Not a single judge with serious reservations from the civil society about their background or their career or whatever it is, or their property was selected, and the court works very well and puts corrupt people in jail and so on. And the approach that was taken there was to include, for the first time in history of Ukraine, to include the international experts in the selection of the judges, and it worked like a charm. Now we have a really good result. This attempt at including the internationals into the reform of the judicial governance bodies is the attempt at scaling the success story. And that is why the judges are so opposed in this reform, because they see it will change the system, which they really do not want. They want to just keep profiting from corruption and just seizing more and more power in Ukrainian state. So I would like to call on everybody or anybody who talks with IMF, who speaks with them, and to persuade them to really take this seriously again and really help Ukraine again to move it further. Because again, I emphasize, nobody wanted back then, back in 2017-18, when the court was created, and because of the IMF's firm position, we really had a very good law. Now we have a very good court. Now it is tempting. I understand it is tempting to check the box. I understand that you can take a formalistic approach and say, oh, the legislation is there. It doesn't matter then what is happening after that. But that is not something we need. I absolutely agree with Ambassador Masikas that it is not the legislation, it is the result, it is the real reform that is needed. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Ambassador, can you say a little bit more about Western aid? Is this a lever that the West can use to push or to solve the current problem? And do you see any other levers from where you sit in Kyiv?
Thanks. Of course, it is a Ukrainian reform to start with, but international support can be and is a factor here. Adoption of those two laws were a policy commitment under EU's macro-financial assistance program and also by the IMF program. The EU, the G7 group of ambassadors, the US, some IFIs have been instrumental also to helping this policy dialogue and bringing together stakeholders in Ukraine, in Kyiv, executive and legislative branches of power, judiciary, and civil society. And I agree with some previous speakers that a unique unity has been achieved. Indeed, among a long list of stakeholders, and this is indeed not without precedent. Supreme Court was reformed with international support back in 2016. High Anti-Corruption Court in 2019, and of course, no best practices, no models can ever be transplanted directly from one country or to another one, but it can be studied. And international partners can help here, and we have helped and best parts chosen. In addition, some issues, of course, of this reform are very sensitive and very personal. Corrupt judges do not want to be vetted, but even flawless ones may not fancy of going through this kind of attestation or vetting process. And here, renowned, impartial, no Ukrainian vested interest related international experts can help mitigate these risks and these sensitivities. The EU will continue to push this and discuss with countries' leadership at the highest level, including We all may expect to hear from on this issue also at the forthcoming EU-Ukraine summit, the 12th of October in Kyiv, and we will keep this up all the time and are helping here in Kyiv on daily business as well. Thank you.
Ambassador, you've been really outspoken about the connection between judicial reform and FDI. If Ukraine wants to move forward and attract international companies, it has to make this reform. You've been great on that issue. In your conversations and your observations, do you think that the presidential administration understands and appreciates that connection? In my interactions with them in their visit to Washington, President Zelenskyy emphasized the need to invest, and he gave lip service to judicial reform, but it wasn't a central part of his platform. Do you think that they're missing it, or that they can do a workaround, or how do they see that connection?
It is no secret that those two laws were adopted in July in the form that they were adopted, including a strong, decisive role for international experts, only with the strong support and hands-on help by President Zelenskyy and his administration. And now in the implementation phase, Sergei Yunushas already referred to the action that Zelenskyy and his administration had taken, bringing again together all stakeholders. And I have participated in 2 of those meetings, and I could sense some shifting in some positions by the judges as well. So we see at the moment, I see here in Kyiv strong determination.
That's great to hear. If you're just joining us, we're talking about Ukraine's fight for judicial reform, and it's at a key moment. We'd love to have your questions. You can put those on Twitter, or you can drop them into Zoom. I want to get a little another comment from Halya. Halya, we've been describing what's going on in Ukraine right now as sabotage. You use that word too. Can you talk to us a little bit more? I know Ukrainian civil society is really afraid that this delay is an attempt to kill these good judicial bills that we've all praised. Are there other ways to kill the implementation of the bill as well, beyond just delaying?
Thank you. Well, Ukraine's judiciary has 2 chances to block the reform, and first chance they've already used by delaying with nominating members to the Essex Council. And the biggest threat to the reform of the High Council of Justice and to the reform of the High Qualification Commission of Judges as well is the Constitutional Court of Ukraine, unfortunately, because the court is majorly composed of representatives of the same judiciary we are trying to reform right now. So those people within the Council of Judges who act upon the instruction received from the leaders of judicial groups, they were the same people within the Constitutional Court, judges who coordinate their actions with the leaders of judicial groups, because they are afraid of losing control over judiciary. It is obvious, and we all remember what happened a year ago when Constitutional Court of Ukraine simply cancelled electronic declaration system, which is one of the biggest Ukrainian achievements after the Revolution of Dignity. And it was so easy for the Constitutional Court to declare the law unconstitutional, despite the fact the law is, I wouldn't say the law is ideal, but experts could not pretend that the law somehow contradicts the Constitution. So it is not the problem for the current composition of the Constitutional Court to say that the law on the reform of the High Council of Justice is unconstitutional. And I'm afraid that they, in few months, Constitutional Court will actually come up with a decision saying that Essex Council is unconstitutional, involvement of international experts is unconstitutional, the authority of the Essex Council to conduct integrity checks on current members of the HCJ is unconstitutional, and the most important, the crucial role of international experts in this process is unconstitutional too. And it is very important to note that this is the Constitutional Court decision is actually the reason why Council of Judges is delaying. They, of course, they do not say that we are not going to nominate, but they are delaying. They say that, okay, now you have this deadline of 21st of October, but then they are planning to conduct some interviews with the candidates, and then it will take some time. Why Council of Judges is delaying? Because they want to win the time for the Constitutional Court. Because it is crucially important to recognize that the decisions of the Essex Council will be irreversible. So if the Constitutional Court rules on the unconstitutionality of the Essex Council after this body is established and after this body have made its opinions on current members of the High Council of Justice or candidates to the High Council of Justice, it will be impossible to return dishonest members of HCJ to their positions or like to green light those candidates who were banned. So this is why judiciary is trying to win time for the Constitutional Court. And this is why we should not allow them to delay. This is why Essex Council should be established as soon as possible. And we simply can't wait till the end of October and then till the end of November, etc., etc. And one last thing, Supreme Court, unfortunately, is playing a very important and bad role in this game, because from Ukraine's judiciary, Supreme Court is the only body who can address these issues to the Constitutional Court. And the next Friday, 8th of October, Supreme Court will decide whether they will initiate this issue before the Constitutional Court. And we are afraid that judges of the Supreme Court, especially leaders of cassation chambers of the court, who are actually the same people who are leading judicial groups, or judicial clans, we are afraid that they will vote in support of this statement to the Constitutional Court. So yes, Constitutional Court unfortunately remains the biggest threat to the reform, and the threat which is still not addressed by authorities.
There's a lot to do, Halya. You're going to be at this for a long time. Mihailo, I know you have your hand up. I want to ask you to respond, and then I'd like to ask you another question. I know this is a really basic question, but it's helpful for us in Washington. Why is the High Council of Justice such an important body to clean up? Could you tell us about some of the cases that you've seen in places where the High Council of Justice has failed, and how important that body is?
Thanks, Melinda. Yes, I'll start with that. Well, to begin with, it is the only constitutional body, it is the only judicial body mentioned in the Constitution, and it is tasked with a lot of things such as appointment of judges, disciplinary proceedings, dismissal of judges, defining policies in many ways for the judiciary. So it is a monstrous, actually, it's a monstrous body that is tasked with defending the independence of the judges and cleansing the ranks of the judiciary if something goes wrong. What it does now, it does the opposite, because it was formed in a way that that the body now is politically dependent, that it only cares about protecting the status quo inside the judiciary, that goes after the independent judges, the whistleblower judges, makes their life miserable and forces them to retire or dismisses them or disciplines them. Just to give you one idea, there was a couple of judges, actually. One judge sentenced to 7 years in prison for bribery, and then another judge sentenced for 6 years in prison by the anti-corruption court, both of them. And what the High Council of Justice does, instead of actually following the law and dismissing them when the verdict comes into force, on that grounds, they release them because they filed before the verdict comes into force, they file the submission to be released on a very high pension with a super status of with keeping the position, or sorry, the status of a judge with a very high pension of several $1,000s a month, and the High Council of Justice gives them this honorary status as the very experienced judges only can do, which requires by law the absolutely impeccable reputation. But the judges who were actually sentenced by the first instance court to years in jail for bribery receive this honorary status from the High Council of Justice. So it does the opposite of what it should be doing, and that is why it should be cleansed. And just to give you an idea about the members of the High Council of Justice, one of them boasts watches $400,000 worth each, and saying it's not a big deal. The others are involved in huge corrupt schemes that the whole country listens to, the wiretapping, and I can go for hours about them. It's staggering how it screams corruption and how it screams really criminal syndicate, and how it should be reformed, how urgent that is. And just to very quickly follow on what Hale was saying about the Constitutional Court, we see this now as the biggest risk, and we see this what is happening right now, the inactivity of the Council of Judges, yes, to really delay as much as possible for the Constitutional Court then to kill this reform altogether. And here I'd like to follow on the reform of the Constitutional Court itself, which is also due or long overdue, and the bill was pending and is pending in the Parliament for quite some time. That had the provisions to reform the Constitutional Court the way the Venice Commission proposed after the very scandalous decision of October last year. It's been a whole year almost since that decision now, and unfortunately the reform is still not there. What the Venice Commission suggests is the open competition to follow our own constitution that has this provision since 2016 to make real competition to the Constitutional Court positions where the judges will be independent. Unfortunately, the Parliament does not follow these recommendations. Unfortunately, it throws out the provisions on the real competition and puts in the provisions that the members of the Parliament can be candidates to the Constitutional Court, even though that directly contradicts the recommendations of the Venice Commission and the G7 countries that President Zelenskyy himself requested. So I just wanted to emphasize how important also in the light of saving this attempt at judicial reform, how important is the reform of the Constitutional Court, and how in order to save this attempt and in order to get things moving, otherwise other parts of other reforms, how President Zelenskyy and his force really should be paying much more attention to the reform of the Constitutional Court itself. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mihailo. That's a really important point. So it's not just this bill, it's also fixing the Constitutional Court. We are ready for our questions. Go ahead and submit those in the Q&A or on Twitter. Ostap Yarish from Voice of America has a question for you, Ambassador. He says, how do you assess the latest de-oligarchization bill approved by the Rada and the possible dismissal of Rada Chairman Dmitry Razumkov? And you're allowed to say no comment, too. Go ahead.
Thanks. We welcome President Zelenskyy's determination to tackle the issue of vested interests in Ukraine, or oligarchic interest, if you will. Of the adoption of the law, we take note. And we emphasize that the implementation of the law must be legally sound and impartial. At the same time, or in addition, many things can be done to tackle vested interests, mainly strengthening the state institutions in the field of rule of law, the same judicial reform, law enforcement agencies, but also institutions like the Anti-Monopoly Committee, the public broadcaster, and all that. So it's the fight against oligarchic interest is much wider than just what falls to the scope of this law. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Halya or Mihailo, do you want to weigh in on either of those issues, on de-oligarchization or Razumkov?
No, thanks. We'd rather concentrate on judicial reform.
No problem. No
if
problem. You're a
possible.
smart man. You're a smart man.
Thank you.
Okay. Question from the National News Agency of Ukraine. This is from Dmytro Shurko. He says, this is again to the ambassador. Do you share conclusions made by the EU Court of Auditors on grand corruption in Ukraine and on the EU efforts in this field recognized as insufficient?
I think in the framework of this event and this discussion that we're having today, it's fair to say that the Court of Auditors report concerned the period from 2016 to 2019, before the current administration, before Zelensky, and now let us focus on the efforts under this administration, this leadership.
Great, thank you. A second question. I think this is a good question for Halya and Mihailo. So Dmytro says that there's a big problem with corrupt judges. We know that. And there's sabotage. You guys have described it and you know all the details. There's sabotage across the system. How do you get clean judges? Where are they? Do they exist in Ukraine? Are there people who will play by the rules? And where do they come from? Halya, do you want to start and then go to Mihailo?
Well, I would say that it's like a philosophical question. So we have huge problems with lawyers' education in Ukraine, and frankly speaking, it is one of the issues the Euro Foundation is dealing to very closely. So we have huge problems in that regard, because of course corruption starts in law universities. So like students who are used to give bribes for good marks for the exams, then they once they graduate from universities and they go to courts, prosecutor's office or bar associations, of course they are keeping traditions they were taught to. And I would like combine the answer to this question with another question I saw in the chat, what should we do with our corrupt judges, and whether it is a way like to dismiss them all at one time. It sounds very nice, but the next question is, where should we take like new 5,000 or 7,000 judges? I would say that we picked the best way to deal with the problem we have right now, because High Council of Justice and High Qualification Commission of Judges are the most influential bodies within judiciary. President of Ukraine or Parliament of Ukraine no more affect judicial appointments or dismissals. Decisions regarding judicial career is taken solely by High Council of Justice and High Qualification Commission of Justice. So judges. So the idea is that we fix these two bodies and then expect them to fix the rest of judiciary, to dismiss bad judges and to hire new one, to employ decent candidates, to come up with new programs for educating future judges. This is something that cannot be done in one day, but this definitely can be done in 2, 3, or 5 years. I would say that the first task for the renewed High Council of Justice would be to get rid of the most notorious Ukrainian judges who are now being covered up for corrupt members of the High Council of Justice. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mihailo, before you jump in, I want to say congratulations to you and the leadership that you and your organization have shown. It is your 5th birthday as the head of the Judiciary Foundation, and you guys are a powerhouse. I've been working with you for 5 years, and I'm really impressed with what you guys have accomplished. A huge congratulations, and look forward to the next 5 years. So any other thoughts that are different from Halya's?
Not at all. Well, thank you very much for your congratulations. And I have to say that we would not achieve anything without our strong partners from the civil society in Ukraine, from the international community, from the press, from the think tanks. So thank you all very much for being such good partners. And we would not have achieved a fraction of those if you guys were not around. again, I think Hala already highlighted it in the comment section with a couple links on the legal education, and really it is a problem how we prepare and how we educate our lawyers, and that has to be changed. I will not take too much time answering about this. Whoever is interested, there's links there. But I would like to change my mind about the previous comment and really comment a little bit on de-oligarchization, because Ukrainian courts is actually one of the pillars why oligarchs are oligarchs, and why they're so strong, and why they're funneling money from Ukraine's budget and from actually the pockets of the taxpayers to their pockets. A lot of things that makes oligarchs end up in courts, and a lot of things were decided by the courts that makes oligarchs. So, such as the monopoly stance on the markets, the pollution, one of the, like a lot of oligarchs are Ukrainian oligarchs and metallurgic and other high polluting businesses. So the millions and billions in fines are cancelled by the courts. They use these courts to intimidate and capture the property of their competitors. Again, I can talk for hours about this. If Zelenskyy tackles and successfully tackles judicial reform and makes Ukrainian courts really just, it will be the biggest de-oligarchization instrument and tool, and he'll be remembered in history books for doing exactly that. Only this one thing, I'm convinced about this. So it is a good thing to say, oh, we adopt a law that names oligarchs, fine, but when it doesn't compare to real judicial reform, in my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have 2 minutes remaining. Halya and Ambassador, any final comments, anything we left out? Halya, I'll let you go first. Any other final comments? Maybe you could say a little bit about how folks in the West can push on these issues and help you all.
Well, thank you, Melinda. I'd like to start saying that I fully agree with what Mihailo just said. Again, this is why judicial reform is crucially important. And by judicial reform, we mean the cleaning and renewal of the High Council of Justice. And for one more time, I would like to stress that now, we cannot waste our time. We cannot allow judiciary to delay even 1 week. So now the president and the parliament have to take actions, and they have to, as soon as possible, to fix the law and replace judiciary sabotaging the reform with some other body able to nominate Ukrainian part of the Essex Council. And again, the reform of the Constitutional Court is crucially important, and it also has to be addressed. And it happened somehow that reforms in Ukraine are pushed by civil society on one hand and by international partners on the other hand. And we see that this kind of cooperation turned to be successful. The biggest Ukrainian achievements could not be possible without civil society advocacy and support from international partners. Anti-corruption reform, establishment of anti-corruption institutions, and establishment of the High Anti-Corruption Court. So now we have to make this the most important and the final step. We have to reform Ukraine's judiciary, and we rely a lot in this on international partners here. They are really tough with Ukrainian authorities, but they have to be so. And we should only keep going. And I believe that we will succeed with this.
Wonderful. That's a great note to end on. Ambassador, one last sentence or two last sentences. The final word is yours. And thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, it is a historic moment. A unique window of opportunity is open, and I want to emphatically reject this post-Soviet style cynicism that one still hears, that it cannot be done. Nobody's interested in fair court system. No, it can be done. The political determination of the political leadership is there, and if this can be done, anything can be done. So this success will, I'm sure, also breed further success. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's the perfect note to end on. Thank you all for joining us. Until next time, have a wonderful weekend. And please, if you don't get Ukraine Alert, get on our website and sign up. Thank you all very much. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.